In this lecture, we'll continue discussing China, but we're actually going to talk about a specific dynasty that governed China, and that's the Ming dynasty. So you'll recall that the mandate of heaven is when heaven chooses a family that is a dynasty to rule China. And then if a dynasty starts doing a bad job, heaven can transfer its mandate to someone else. So we're looking at one of those dynasties, the Ming dynasty, and it governs from 1368 to 1644. Now, generally, I don't ask for years in this class, but I do give years so you can just get a sense of where we're at. So you can see we're in this period when Europeans are going to start exploring, right? Christopher Columbus, he has his famous expedition in 1492, for example. So I just want you to think about that, because one thing that's really neat about the Ming Dynasty, they were very wealthy and powerful, so wealthy and powerful, they could build these amazing ships. So if you look at this image here, this PowerPoint, you can see two ships. There's that very big ship there, and then a smaller ship with crosses on it. The smaller ship is one of Christopher Columbus's ships. So when Christopher Columbus set out on his voyages of exploration, he took 3 ships that had a total of 700 people aboard, about that size. And you can see it's about 100 feet long. The Ming China would send out expeditions with dozens of those bigger ships, with thousands of sailors. So my point here is to show how wealthy and powerful Ming China was, and that they had the development of a navy, right? They were able to invest that wealth, that money, that power into building a very strong navy, one that could certainly compete or even better the Europeans. Now, I do want to quickly point out that in terms of exploration, having gigantic ships isn't necessarily the greatest thing. Sometimes a smaller ship may be better. But my point is simply to show that the Chinese understood navies, and they had the wealth and power that, had they wanted to, they could have gone out on voyages of discovery, right? And you can see that especially in this map, right? This map of Ming China. So if you look at this, there's Ming China in the upper right. And you can see that they went out around Southeast Asia, to India, to Arabia, even to Africa. Now, one thing I want to stress, these were not voyages of exploration. Zheng He, you can see his name there. He's the Chinese admiral who leads these expeditions. These are voyages. I mean, he's taking out these giant ships with thousands of people on them and going out to all these distant places. But I want to stress, he knew where he was going. He knew how to get there. These are not voyages of exploration. The Chinese knew these places existed. But I want to stress, they were capable of traveling to them, right? Chinese people were able to travel to Africa. Now, one thing we know about European exploration, right? Europeans started going around exploring the coast of Africa and then figured out that they could go around the south of Africa and reach India. There's no reason why the Chinese could not have done the same thing, just in the opposite direction. The Chinese were capable of getting to Africa. They could have gone down south, and then gone north around Africa and gotten to Europe. Conversely, the Chinese could have sailed east, had they wanted, and discovered the Americas. Right? They had that capacity. They had that capability. But I do want to stress that Zheng He, when he's leading these expeditions, he's not going out to find new things. He already knows that they exist. So you may say, well, why is he traveling there? A big part of this was to obtain tribute. Now you may say, okay, great. What is tribute? Tribute is a gift given by an inferior to a superior. So, for example, I study Korea. I have an advisor in Korea who taught me a lot. He was a big help to me, but he's my superior. I'm his inferior. So whenever I visit him, I always bring him a bottle of alcohol as a gift. He doesn't give me any gifts because he takes care of me in other ways. But the key thing here is that's a kind of tribute, right? I'm the inferior giving a gift to a superior. Now, remember we talked about in the previous lecture that in China, the Chinese worldview, there's only one emperor, and that person is in China, and China is the central kingdom in the whole universe. So everyone is China's inferiors. Other countries should give China tribute. Right? Other countries should give China gifts. Now, one thing I do want to point out, we don't have time to go into the whole tribute system. China usually gave gifts back, and sometimes the gifts that China gave back were actually more expensive than the ones they received. But the key thing here is that there's a symbolic value, because when you receive tribute, what that means is people are recognizing you as above them, as superior to them. And you can see here in the picture with the emperor sitting down, you have someone bowing down to him, offering him horses as tribute. Right? That's someone from Central Asia. They had really good horses there. The Chinese wanted those horses because they were so good, and so they would offer them that kind of gift. In the right, though, you can see a kind of tribute that Zheng He would bring back, in this case from Africa. He brought back a giraffe. Now, you may say, well, what's the big deal about that? Why is that important? Well, there's several reasons why tribute are important. There's two big ones I want to focus on here. Tribute is important not only because it makes you feel good. You're like, hey, someone gave me a gift because I'm awesome. It affects your audience. So you're Chinese and someone comes from a faraway country, bows down to your emperor and gives him a gift. You think, wow, our emperor's really awesome. Our emperor's great. I should be loyal and follow this powerful, amazing emperor because he is so awesome that people from all over the world are coming to give him gifts. So, and sometimes they brought gifts that you'd never seen before. Chinese people hadn't seen giraffes, and then all of a sudden these people come from Africa, brought by Zheng He, right? Zheng He knows he's visiting African countries. He would bring Africans, Indians, people from Arabia back to China with him with their tribute gifts to give to the emperor. And one thing they brought was a giraffe. And people are like, wow, I've never seen an African before. Here's this person that I've never seen before. And they live in this faraway place. And they think our emperor's so awesome. They made this long journey to give him this fabulous gift, this animal we've never seen. And giraffes were special because they matched a mythic beast that the Chinese believed in, similar to a unicorn, that was only supposed to appear when there was a really good ruler. Right? So the idea here is that, wow, this beast is only supposed to appear when we have a good ruler. Here some people came all the way from Africa. They look completely different from us. And they came this long distance to give us this gift of this beast that only appears when we have a good emperor. We must have a good emperor. We call this legitimacy, right? Legitimacy is whether or not you accept your government as having a right to rule you, right? In the United States, our legitimacy comes from the idea that we vote for our leaders, that we live in a democracy, right? That's why we accept our leaders, because in theory, we voted for them. If we lose an election, we just know we need to try it harder next time. But in China, they believe in the mandate of heaven. And the emperor needs to convince people that he has the mandate of heaven because they can overthrow him if he doesn't. One way to do that is receiving tribute. Having people come to you, say how awesome you are, give you fabulous gifts. And Zheng He's visits, a lot of it was about getting tribute. Bringing people from out of China, from places like Africa and India, people the Chinese had never seen before, and bringing these fabulous gifts. Now, again, I'm not too strict at years, but notice that Zheng He's voyages are in the early 1400s. The Ming had only been founded in 1368. It was still a new dynasty, and the Ming needed legitimacy. It needed Chinese people to be convinced that they had received the mandate of heaven and that the Chinese people should support the Ming and do what the Ming emperor told them to do. So when you put this all together, a large part of these expeditions was to get tribute to make the Chinese emperor, the Chinese dynasty look good, so Chinese people would accept it and do what the dynasty told them to do. Now, I call these expeditions of Zheng He, this Chinese admiral, and by the way, E's a lot of times in Chinese are pronounced like an so it's not Zheng He, it's Zheng He. I call this China's first missed opportunity to try and do something that would help them catch up with the West. Right? We know that China has the technical ability to go explore. Zheng He went on these amazing expeditions, but it didn't lead to voyages of exploration, right? Remember, Zheng He knew where he was going. This isn't technically exploration. But the Chinese did if they chose to. They could have gone around Africa and got to Europe. They could have sailed east and gotten to the Americas. They chose not to. Why did they stop? Well, first of all, the purpose was to obtain tribute. That is, political legitimacy for the Ming emperor. And they did that. They got the giraffe. So why keep doing it? Why spend money to do something you've already done? They've already accomplished the purpose. They got political legitimacy for the Ming emperor. They made him look good. So why keep doing this? And to give you kind of a concrete example, in the 1960s, there was what the so-called space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Who could put a person on the moon first? Whichever country could put a person on the moon first, they could say, we're superior. Right? The Americans, if we could put a person on the moon first, we would say democracy is superior. If the communists could put someone on the moon first, they would say communism is superior. Once you do it, you don't need to keep doing it because you proved you could do it. It's similar here. They don't need to spend money to obtain this tribute from these countries because they've already done it. They've already got the political legitimacy. Why spend money on it? Especially when that money could be spent somewhere else. You may have heard of the Great Wall of China. That's in the north of China. The reason they had a Great Wall there was because in the past people invaded across in that area and conquered China. So why are we spending money on these expensive expeditions? Shouldn't we spend our money defending our northern frontier so we don't get conquered? Let's spend that money on building up the Great Wall. And I should point out, right, the Ming overthrew a Mongol dynasty that had conquered China from the north. So they had good reason to be nervous about what was going on in the north because China, the previous dynasty, had actually not been Chinese, had been Mongolian. They had come down and conquered the Ming. And when the Ming are finally defeated, it's by people from the north. So it made sense to focus on the north, to spend money on building up the Great Wall, rather than to doing something like sending out these expeditions where they had already accomplished this purpose. In addition, there was a fear that by bringing in people from other countries, they might bring in what the Chinese called barbarian influence. Now, this seems odd to us, especially as if you're an American, because we live in a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural country, and we usually view diversity as a good thing, right? The more different perspectives we have, the more likely we are to come up with new and creative ideas, new innovations. Right? I would argue that the diversity of the United States makes us a dynamic country, and that's one reason why we're leaders in technology and science and things like that. But to people in China, they were afraid that bringing in new ideas, non-Confucian ideas, ideas that maybe clashed with Confucianism, might bring in barbarian influence that could threaten China's stability. And from their perspective, stability was much more important than innovation. Right? They did not have any idea of what kinds of things innovation could bring. They did understand, though, that what instability could do. Instability kills people. It leads to people not getting enough food to eat. It leads to a lot of misery. So they didn't want to bring in new ideas that could challenge Confucianism, that could challenge the empire, because they desired stability. One thing I do want to point out, we'll talk about this later in class, when new ideas do come into China, they do help destroy the dynasty. It's just a different dynasty. So while this seems odd to us, they weren't completely off about this. They were correct that bringing in outside influence would threaten China. In addition, in China, Confucianism did not like trade. Confucians tend to look down on trade because merchants didn't really make anything. They just moved goods around. They basically profited from other people's work. Now, I think Confucianism misunderstood merchants. Merchants are very valuable because they bring stuff to people who need it. And, naturally they have to profit. But in any case, Confucianism had a distrust of trade, and there was a fear that people would waste their money on foreign imports and buy things they didn't really need. So the key thing is, I want you to take away from this, Zheng He's expedition showed that China had the technical ability to go out and explore. They could have explored if they wanted to. But for very good reasons, they stopped. Why spend money that could be used better elsewhere on something that doesn't help you much and that might hurt you? Right? Let's invest in building up that wall. Let's invest in protecting ourselves from the north. Let's not do something that might bring in influence that could topple the dynasty. It makes a lot of sense when we look at it from that perspective. But they didn't know it at this time, so this was the first missed opportunity. China could have been the one that led the voyages of exploration, but they're not. It will be the Europeans who are going to do that. And I'm sorry, one other thing I need to emphasize is China's a huge country. There was a feeling that everything they needed, they had. And they were pretty much right. Right? There wasn't a whole lot in this time period that the outside world could offer them that they didn't already have. So together, we have a missed opportunity. They could have gone out exploring. So we'll talk about later, the ability of the Europeans to go out exploring allowed them to gain a lot of wealth and power that helped them to catch up.